Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about the live-action Ghost in the Shell movie? Stick around and find out. Was that like, is that nasal enough? I can't do it like they do it. Anyway. Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Ghost in the Shell, starring Scarlett Johansson. The synopsis provided by Paramount Pictures on imdb.com reads, in the near future, Major, which is so weird. I saw the original anime, and I was like, her name is Major? Something's gotta be lost in translation there. Anyway, in the near future, Major is the first of her kind, a human saved from a terrible crash who is cyber-enhanced to be a perfect soldier devoted to stopping the world's most dangerous criminals. When terrorism reaches a new level that includes the ability to hack into people's minds and control them, Major is uniquely qualified to stop it. As she prepares to face a new enemy, Major discovers that she has been lied to. And then I'm going to leave out, they tell you what the lie is. in somewhat uncertain terms, but still, I'm like, that's too much. And there's a line in the trailer, I'm like, that's too much. You shouldn't be saying that much. So I'm going to leave that out. She's been lied to. She will stop at nothing to recover her past, find out who did this to her, and stop them before they do it to others. Based on the internationally acclaimed Japanese manga, The Ghost in the Shell, which I did see the animated movie, as I mentioned, long time ago. I'm not reviewing this as, like evaluating how well it holds to the original material. I'm not a particular fan of the original one. I mean, I liked it. I saw it. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'd never seen really anime like this, apart from maybe Akira with this really kind of serious, dark, storytelling. But I did enjoy it. I'm just not like oh my gosh, I'm a huge Ghost in the Shell fan. But I might be getting a little closer in that direction after seeing this movie. I really did enjoy it. Spoilers. Okay, so let's talk about the story, the script, and the pacing a little bit. This is not like a wall-to-wall action sci-fi movie, despite the trailers maybe implying that, or maybe what they've shown of the movie in various places. It's not like this huge action fest all the way through. Now, it does have a good number of action sequences, and I would say it is an action movie, but it's equally, a sci-fi mystery. There's plenty of time where you're just kind of like in the world and you're following the main characters as they're slowly uncovering this mystery, and that's broken up quite frequently with action. But it's not like this mindless, certainly not mindless, but it's not like a mainly an action movie. There's a good amount of world building just through strange imagery presented in the movie, and you might think from watching some of the trailers, is this movie going to be too weird for me? Am I going to understand what the crap is going on? But what's cool is that the story itself is a pretty straightforward mystery. But there's still so much going on in the world. It takes place in a futuristic Japan, and but I mean that doesn't say the half of it, because it's clear to me from the movie that there's been so much blending of cultures that has happened by this point in the future, and there's just all these different weird things that people are doing that have to do with technology, but there's also maybe some kind of like strange religious stuff going on at the same time, just based on the visuals. So there's a lot to look at and say, what is that about? And yet you don't need to know what the heck that is about in order to follow the story. So it's a easy story to follow, but probably a really difficult world to totally understand. And I love that kind of combination. So let's see here. It was a little bit quiet at times, which I didn't mind until about the end of the second act. Right just before the beginning of the third act, I was like, okay, you're not revealing information at the pace that I would quite like in order to really keep me engaged. But that was just a brief moment, and then it started revealing basically everything at the end, and also brought the characterization to the character motives to the forefront. It's not like a hugely character-driven movie, at least not in the sense that I felt like emotionally involved. until the end. I was surprised suddenly in the climax. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally invested in Major's story, in what she wants to accomplish. I'm feeling for what she's lost, and I was even kind of moved nearly to tears in the final resolution of her story. So that was a really cool surprise, in addition to just enjoying kind of the mystery, the strange world, and the action. Let's see here. In talking just briefly about the cast, the strength, I would say, in the cast is more in the casting than in particularly, outstanding performances. We've got Scarlett Johansson, and she's, to my mind, kind of playing just a more stoic version of Black Widow in this. It's not something wildly different by any stretch from what we've seen her do before. But there's a lot of unfamiliar faces in this movie that are just kind of briefly in the scene sometimes, and they're just interesting characters. Like one guy that she interacts with who's just for some reason sweating to a level that no one else in the room is sweating. He's just this sweaty, greasy guy, and there's something weird about, and there's all kinds of characters that just have this one thing about them or two things about them that's just kind of what is up there, and so and some of that's the casting too, is in addition to the makeup and stuff like that. So there's also Juliette Binoche, who was, I didn't know her name before I looked it up, but a very familiar face to me. She's often in these supporting roles or kind of in smaller dramas and stuff, and she stood out to me in this movie as a warm emotional center for Major as a character, and kind of providing the connection to Major's humanity as she's sorting through, how human is she, and what is left of her humanity when she can't trust her memories and all she is a brain in a synthetic body. Anyway, I'll get back to some of that philosophical stuff in just a little bit. Let's talk about the stunts and visuals just briefly. There are visual effects in almost every frame of this movie, and most of it is just kind of incidental world-building type stuff. There are at least three completely different varieties of holograms. There's one where you are communicating to somebody, doing a FaceTime, but the hologram version. There are holograms that are billboards, and those are different. They're more transparent, and they're not structured the same way. There are holograms that people interact with in order to operate technology, and each of these different types of holograms looks very different, and has a different vibe to it entirely. And that's just the holograms. I mean, there's all kinds of visual stuff going on in this movie that's just fascinating, and you could pause it. There's passing shots where it's whoa, what was that? I would love to pause and go back and just watch that little section of the screen for a little bit, and there's just so much visually going on in this movie that's really interesting. What else? Oh yeah, there's cybernetic limbs that people just have, that are a combination of makeup and visual effects in order to achieve them. So it's this great mix of practical stuff, with animatronics and makeup and stuff like that, and CG. It's this handing back and forth that really kind of helps sell the CG. When you have as much practical stuff as they do, it can make me kind of guess for just a moment, even though I'm cursed with an eye to pick out CG. It's oh, is that CG or da-da-da? Or sometimes I just get tired of keeping track because they go back and forth enough that I don't get distracted as much by just the constant barrage of CG. So there's also some cool slow-mo action, in the fight sequences, but the choreography and the fight sequences and the way it's shot and all that kind of stuff, it's not groundbreaking. It's just plenty cool, and that was good enough for me. All right, so let's talk about the philosophy a little bit. I do try to ask myself when playing a game or taking, in fiction of any kind, is there anything of a worthwhile moral or philosophical or spiritual significance going on in here that would stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation? And I think that's definitely true in this movie. The main slogan of the movie, paraphrased, it's not quite this, is, "We cling so much to our memories because we think they define us, but it's what we do that defines us." And that's interesting because that's kind of we've heard that before from Christian Bale's Batman in Batman Begins, and it's not entirely true from a biblical perspective. Now, by default, what we do defines our position before God. The Bible tells us that all have sinned and fall short of God's perfect standard of holiness, and therefore we are not compatible, if he's going to be a just God, to be with him and to be in the perfect environment that he is longing to create and live in with us. So we're not compatible for that. And so there's definitely a sense in which what we do defines our relationship to God, and by default that leaves us all separated from God. But for those who turn to Jesus for rescue and forgiveness, his perfect record of righteousness is painted over theirs. And so they are completely redefined by Jesus, by what Jesus has done. And by the love that Jesus has for us. And likewise, whether we're talking about a Christian or a non-Christian, God defines our worth, our significance, our value, because he made us in his image, which is a little bit vague in the Bible. We don't know exactly what that means, but in some way we are made to reflect who God is. And then on top of that, God chose to invest in us, invest love in us, and to live a really hard, difficult life of rejection and a torturous death, also that it would be possible for us to have a restored relationship with him. And so it's really God, in the way that he made us and in the way that he invests in us, that really defines us, defines our significance in the universe, and defines our value and our characteristics. And so our own attempts to define ourselves through what we do, as this movie wants to say, that falls immeasurably short of how God, our maker, has defined us. The movie also presents the idea that our soul, our mind, or as it calls it most of the movie, our ghost, is ultimately immaterial. It has a strong connection to our brain, but our brain seems to be at best an interface or a connection point between our immaterial being and our material bodies and the material world. And this is a pretty rare treatment, in my experience, of human consciousness in science fiction. Science fiction normally is going to take a naturalistic, a hard naturalistic, or an atheistic view and say that our minds are it's really just electrical impulses in our brain, and that's it. There is nothing immaterial going on. Whereas from a biblical perspective, there is an immaterial component with us, and then ultimately our intended form is composed of both material and immaterial aspects. But we are not just this material, matter. That's being redundant, isn't it? Material matter. So anyway, that was cool to see, and so hopefully this story can encourage other mainstream, big-budget, blockbuster sci-fi movies to be freed up from that traditional hard naturalism that science fiction usually takes. And I think that freeing ourselves up from that kind of worldview in science fiction allows for much more thought-provoking stories, such as the treatment of the immaterial being in Battlestar Galactica, as we question, are the Cylons, human or not, and stuff like that, or in a story like this. There's more questions that are up in the air and that are interesting to probe than if we commit ourselves from the start to a purely naturalistic worldview. So I think it's better philosophy and theology, and I also think it makes for better just plain storytelling, whether you're a believer in Christ or not. All right, so I have no idea what your tastes are, but if I were a time traveler, I would go back in time and say, hey, Peter, dude, go see this one and just plan to buy it too. And while you're at it, before you go to the theater, see if you can track down the original Ghost in the Shell anime movies and the TV series, because you're going to be itching to go back and check those out again after you've seen this movie, if nothing else, so that you can just spend a little bit more time with this really striking, unusual world and its striking characters. It's rated PG-13 for intense sequences of sci-fi violence, suggestive content, and some disturbing images. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you are a fan of the anime and what you thought of this after seeing it. If you want to support this channel, you can do that in easy, fun ways by checking out our podcast and our audio dramas over at spiritblade.com. After that, I hope you'll join us over at christiangeekcentral.com. Can you see this? Is the light too bright? The light's too bright. Oh, maybe if I just turn it just this way a little bit. And join us there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.